Probably of all the human motions that we can experience, being lost is probably one that we like the least. And maybe you've been geographically lost sometimes, but we're really talking more about that existential or that kind of spiritual one where I just don't know what's going on with my life or my family or my job. We just feel like there's nothing left. And if you look up lost in the dictionary, the second definition that Merriam-Webster talks about is it's something which cannot be restored. So you're really screwed. There's nothing left. Well, I think this is a great message for us on any Sunday, but it's a great one for us to think about in terms of our relationship with Christ. And we've heard this gospel a lot of times, but unless you do the homework and know the backstory to this, you miss about 80% of what this gospel has to teach us. Okay? So let's start with the first one about the lost sheep. Now, this is more than your neighbor calling you up and saying, I think your cows are out. Okay? Takes a different message on this one. So in Jesus' day, particularly in this part of the world, nobody was ever wealthy enough to have a herd by themselves. So you would have a group of shepherds who would really take care of a communal flock. So it belonged to the community, and they would kind of shepherd all these animals around to good pastures. And so there was more at stake here. So if there was one missing, it was a big deal. So you got somebody else, one of the other guys, say, hey, you watch the rest of these, I got to go find the other one. Because it wasn't just yours. And so that's why we hear that when he finds it, he puts it on his shoulders, he comes back, and he calls the community together and said, I got the investment returned. So it was a bigger deal than just one sheep. Not that that's not enough. But there was more invested in that. Well, this kind of lost is the one that happens to us when we just kind of wander. We just kind of wander. And we don't necessarily mean to. We just kind of find ourselves in a different place. You know, really, nobody decides that their life's going to go south once. You make one little decision and another little decision, and you kind of move further and further and further away, and then all of a sudden you turn around and say, how in God's name did I get here? We wandered. Okay? That's the first kind of lost. What was the second thing in the gospel that was lost today? The coin, okay? So now this isn't just I lost a penny in the couch, okay? There's more to this. And so in Jesus' day, in this area, the homes were pretty crude, and they had dirt floors, and they were covered with straw. So if you lost something, you had to basically rake the house, get it all cleaned out of there so that you can find something that you lost. But that's really not the most important part of this story that Jesus is telling. So those 10 silver pieces and one being lost was like losing part of your dowry, or losing, it was compared to one scholar that I read, it's kind of like losing your wedding ring. Those coins were sewn into a headdress which you wore on your wedding day. So it wasn't really one silver piece, one drachma is not really worth very much, even in today's world. But it was not just the monetary value, but it was what it represented. And so the woman tore her house apart, lit a lamp. They only had one window in the house a lot of times, and it was about 18 or 20 inches wide. And so she lit a lamp and cleaned the whole place up, turned it upside down. And then she called up her friends and said, guess what? I found my wedding ring. Come and celebrate with me. Okay? So this kind of lost kind of symbolizes to us carelessness. Carelessness. So it's when we kind of say, well, it doesn't really make a big deal, or I don't really need to go to church every Sunday, or we get careless about things. And then we don't think about what the ramifications are. Okay? Then we have this great gospel today, which we've heard a bazillion times, about the prodigal son. And of course, it really shouldn't be called the prodigal son because he was a putz. The prodigal son is not near as important as the forgiving father in this story. Okay? And so again, to put it into context, in those days, any of the inheritance just went to the boys, not to the girls. And in this case, there were just two of them. So that meant that it went 2/3 to the eldest and 1/3 to the youngest. So the younger son was kind of a jerk. He said, well, you're going to die anyway. Give me my inheritance now so I can do what I want with it. And we hear what happens. He took it and he went to what the scriptures call dissolute living. It's the only time that word is used in the New Testament, okay? So he goes, he blows it all, and so he's got to find something to do. So he goes to work for a pig farmer. Why is that a bad deal? Why is it a bad deal? Not for you, for him. He was a Jew. It was the worst god-awful job you could have. He was taking care of the pigs as a Jew. Jews look at pigs as unclean, okay? And not only that, but he was still starving. He wanted to eat what they were feeding the pigs, and nobody made a move to give him anything. So the light finally went on. He goes, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to tell Dad, I don't deserve to be called your son. And then comes the next clue when he says, I'll tell him to treat me like one of the hired hands. Now, here's something you might not know. In those days, the servants were people who kind of had status in the family. They had job security. They were taken care of pretty well. The hired hands, it was different. They were the temps. They were just temporaries. They had absolutely no rights and no establishment. They had nothing at all. And so he didn't say, I'm going to go back and be one of Dad's servants. He said, I'm going to go back and say, treat me like one of your hired hands. So we hear what happens. He heads home, and while he's still a long way off, his dad sees him, which tells you what? He was looking for him. He was looking for him. And he ran out, gave him a big hug, gave him a kiss. If it was your kid, you'd say, get over here and I'll give you a good crack upside of the head. But no, he didn't do that. And so the son said, I don't deserve to be called your son, and just treat me as one of the hired hands. The dad didn't even respond to that. There's 3 things that he did that are extraordinary. The first one is this. He said, go quick, get the finest robe. Do you know what that means? What you wore, your dress, was a sign of your connection to a family. And so putting on the robe was restoring his place. What was the second thing that he did? Ring on the finger. What does that mean? With kings and rulers, they would have a signet ring that they would put their stamp on, something with wax. That was a sign of their authority. The ring that they're talking about here was his access to the family wealth. Put the ring on his finger. And what was the third one? The sandals, okay? What does that mean? Slaves or hired servants didn't have shoes. You couldn't travel. So by putting sandals on his feet, not only did he say you're forgiven, but there are no strings attached. You can leave again if you want. Now, these 3 losts, and this third one was a deliberate loss, huh? The son just kind of told his dad to go pound sand, and he went and did that, okay? And then, of course, you have the crabby brother who was left, and it's very interesting. We won't spend a lot of time on that, but it's very interesting because the son is really mad. Okay, he has an attitude anyway. And then he says, and when this son of yours comes back after blowing your money on loose women, how does he know he blew money on loose women? I think he's got a great imagination, and that's what he wanted to be doing. He didn't even talk to his brother. He hadn't even seen him yet. So what's this tell us, about being lost? This is it. We sing, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Okay? Jesus came to save the lost. And so you and I and our kind of righteous attitudes need to be really careful, because do we need to be saved or not? If we don't need to be saved, then the final days and judgment's going to be very interesting. We say, well, really, thanks a lot, but I really didn't need you. We all are lost at different times for different reasons. Sometimes our loss is wandering. We just kind of wander away. We don't keep ourselves focused on our faith, our practice of our faith. We just kind of wander. That's why we use the term fallen away Catholics, okay? They kind of wander little by little by little. Their faith gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and then they disagree with more and more and more things, and they wonder why. They're wandering. The second one is out of carelessness. Okay, well, it doesn't really make any difference. At least I'm not as bad as the guy down the road, okay? We get careless. Sometimes it's deliberate. We just get mad. We are, as we hear in the first reading, a stiff-necked people. So we get mad at God or the church or the pastor or the pope or whatever our flavor of the day is, but it really needs to be focused on God, not all these other things. So as we continue to pray today, and this is the kind of God that we're going to baptize this little girl in, the God that says, no matter what happens, I always accept her. I always want to bring her back. I always want her to be restored. The only thing that ever gets in the way of that is if we flip God off and say, I'm not interested. God will always, always accept us. And that's why you and I are called to live our lives in the same way if we're disciples of Jesus. So, we think about the times that we're lost. We think about a God who always wants to accept us and restore us. That's who we're going to baptize this little girl in today. So let's have Mom and Dad and the boys and the sponsors right up here.